The following program is an original production of Link TV.
The following contains graphic images of torture. Viewer discretion is advised.
Torture devours its children, and it is, like slavery, the enemy of all humankind.
The United States does not torture. It's against our laws and it's against our values. I have not authorized it and I will not authorize it.
So they defined torture in a new way that made it very hard to commit.
In order for something to be torture, it has to cause pain of a severity so great that it would be, quote, equivalent to major organ failure or even death. His head was lowered, a cloth was placed over his face, cold water was poured on his face from a bottle, suffocation by water.
The cost of this policy of harsh interrogation and torture to our country has been enormous. It's reduced our reputation in the world. We are no longer the paragon of human rights.
Part of moving the country forward is dealing with what we've done, owning it, understanding it, and rejecting it.
The green light came from the president, the vice president, the attorney general. Everybody signed off on them who was in the top of the national security community. This was not something that happened without approval.
Clearly, crimes have been committed, serious crimes. The people who have committed those crimes must be held accountable for them. I think that's a given.
Torture. The word appears almost daily in headlines of newspapers across the country. Increasingly, Americans are asking, behind the closed doors of faraway prisons, what acts were committed in our name? Who committed these acts, and will they be held to account? Can torture be put on trial?
One of the shocks to me personally as someone working in the field of human rights in the United States after 9/11 was how fragile that norm against torture really was. You know, frankly, on September 10th, I thought, we had lots of challenges in the human rights movement, abuses that we had to tackle, norms that needed to be strengthened. I never believed that torture was one of them.
Out of the ashes of September 11th came a radical new foreign policy. While Americans grieved, top officials in the Bush administration were already crafting a plan to fight a new kind of enemy. Just days after the 9/11 attacks, Vice President Dick Cheney appeared on NBC's Meet the Press and declared a whole new set of rules.
We'll have to work toward the dark side, if you will. We're going to spend time in the shadows and in the intelligence world. A lot of what needs to be done here will have to be done quietly, without any discussion, using sources and methods that are available to our intelligence agencies.
Critics of the administration say that with Vice President Cheney's declaration, a new policy had taken root. A policy that would culminate in the indefinite detention of suspects outside of the U.S. justice system and their torture in U.S. custody.
What did he mean that we were going to do in the shadows? And what it meant was they basically unleashed the CIA to be the lead player in the war on terror, and they created a legal system where the U.S. government could operate outside any known sort of system of law. They were outside of international law and they were outside of domestic law. They were doing things that this country has never authorized before.
Very early on, after the first reports started coming out in the Washington Post, Dana Priest had a story quoting unnamed senior administration officials saying, we don't kick the expletive out of them, we ask other countries to do that. Or if we're not violating somebody's human rights, then we're not doing our jobs. Those kinds of things.
It began sort of step by step. What they did was they created a system of secret prisons, what they called black site prisons, that were hidden away around the world. And they also created a system of snatching people outside of the rule of law. so that they could use renditions, they called them, to pick people up, pick up suspects without any kind of legal charge, take them away, put them in these secret prisons, and interrogate them by almost any means. As Cheney said, we're going to use every means at our disposal. And what that turned out to mean was what we've since many people have come to think of as torture.
In the spring of 2002, U.S. intelligence agents in Pakistan captured Abu Zubaydah, a Palestinian-born man they described as al-Qaeda's travel agent. He was transferred to a secret CIA detention center in Thailand for interrogation. In a report made public by journalist Mark Danner years later in the New York Review of Books, the International Committee of the Red Cross documented Abu Zubaydah's treatment at the hands of the CIA.
He was, in a sense, the guinea pig for the alternative set of procedures. Over the next several months, the CIA used a number of techniques on him, beginning with a set of combined techniques to keep him from sleeping. For 3 weeks, he was kept naked, shackled to a chair, so that blisters formed on his legs from immobility. He was kept in a perfectly white room under 24-hour, very bright white light. The room was extremely cold, to the extent that one official said he seemed to keep turning blue. Noise and music were playing at a high volume 24 hours a day. And if his eyelids started to droop, an interrogator would come forward and splash cold water in his face to keep him awake. So this went on for weeks, and eventually another set of procedures after the sleep deprivation were put in place. These involved forcing him into a very small box, a small black box about 3.5 feet tall, 2 by 3 feet in area. Looping, when he came out of the box, a towel around his neck, smashing him repeatedly against the wall. Zubaydah was repeatedly beaten with punches and slaps. Eventually, he was subjected to waterboarding. He was strapped to a hospital bed, a gurney. His head was lowered, a cloth was placed over his face, cold water was poured on his face from a bottle, and there ensued what the International Committee of the Red Cross calls in its chapter on this, suffocation by water. And we have very graphic descriptions of this as it was done to Abu Zubaydah and Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, another of the 9/11 captives.
Did you authorize the tactics that were used against Khalid Sheikh Mohammed?
I was aware of the program, certainly, and involved in helping get the process cleared. That is, the agency, in effect, came in and wanted to know what they could and couldn't do. And they talked to me as well as others to explain what they wanted to do, and I supported it.
In hindsight, do you think any of those tactics that were used against Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and others went too far?
I don't.
And on KSM, one of those tactics, of course, widely reported was waterboarding, and that seems to be a tactic we no longer use. Even that, you think, was appropriate?
I do.
By the summer of 2006, growing accusations that the Bush administration was torturing detainees at secret locations forced the president to acknowledge for the first time that the CIA had set up secret detention facilities overseas.
And so the CIA used an alternative set of procedures. These procedures were designed to be safe, to comply with our laws, our Constitution, and our treaty obligations.
The September 6, 2006 speech was, in my opinion, the only historic speech that President Bush ever gave. It was a speech about, as he said, an alternative set of procedures. That was his phrase.
The Department of Justice reviewed the authorized methods extensively and determined them to be lawful. I cannot describe the specific methods used. I think you understand why. If I did, it would help the terrorists learn how to resist questioning and to keep information from us that we need to prevent new attacks on our country. But I can say the procedures were tough, and they were safe, and lawful, and necessary.
But in fact, it was a speech about torture, and the means by which the administration essentially legally chose, with the help of lawyers, to disguise what was torture under international law and make it into what the president called his alternative set of procedures.
Those lawyers came from the Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel, In April of 2002, a memo drafted by John Yoo and signed by Jay Bybee rewrote the rules on interrogations.
The Bush administration's lawyers essentially did this by redefining what torture means. We see this in the so-called torture memo that was signed on April 1st, 2002, which essentially says, in order for something to be torture, it has to cause pain of a severity so great that it would be, quote, equivalent to major organ failure or even death, close quote. And this allowed President Bush to continually say, we do not torture, at the same time as the United States was waterboarding prisoners, for example.
6 people played a very substantive role. They were John Yoo and Jay Bybee at the Office of Legal Counsel in the Justice Department. They were David Addington, who I see as the intellectual spearhead of all this, in the Vice President's office. Alberto Gonzalez, counselor to the President in the President's office. And OSD General Counsel Jim Haynes, and a 6th lawyer, Douglas Feith, who was Undersecretary of Defense for Policy at the Pentagon.
Basically, they carved out all kinds of loopholes in the law so that they would really make it very hard for people to be convicted of torture.
But lawyers in the Justice Department went even further. John Yoo of the Office of Legal Counsel wrote that wartime presidential powers trumped U.S. torture law. In December of 2005, John Yoo defended that position in a debate with Notre Dame professor Doug Cassell.
If the president deems that he's got to torture somebody, including by crushing the testicles of the person's child, there is no law that can stop that.
No treaty.
And also no law by Congress. That's what you wrote in the August 2002 memo.
I think it depends on why the president thinks he needs to do that.
And this message got out to the field. This message was out there in every private knapsack, that the gloves were off and that these people were subhuman and that we could pretty much do anything we wanted to them. Then you get Abu Ghraib. I think the first inclination I had of it was when the Secretary of State walked through the door that separated our 2 adjoining offices on the 7th floor of the State Department building and informed me that he had been informed that a number of photographs were going to come out and they were going to be quite horrendous. And they were going to show U.S. armed forces treating badly Iraqi prisoners at a place called Abu Ghraib in Iraq. That's the first indication that I had that we were doing some pretty grim things to detainees in the so-called global war on terror. This was not just soldiers pushing the envelope. This was probably, and this came to me rather rapidly, this was probably a result of policies that had been aggressively administered by the administration which I served. And that was a very disturbing thing. That was probably as disturbing as the fact that the pictures were disturbing. And then people say, well, my critics say, well, that was a few bad eggs, a few bad apples. May have been true in 1 or 2 cases, but in most cases, those few bad apples even were incited, if you will, to do what they did, I think, by the fact that at the highest policy level, this attitude was invoked.
And this was part of a deliberate policy. It's hard to say whether the motivation was to confuse the soldier on the ground, but unquestionably that was the effect. The impact of this reign of distortion and confusion about the standards is so widespread. It's difficult to calculate the impact because, of course, we know about many, many prisoners who were subjected to the so-called enhanced interrogation program, but also just the drift of lawlessness that took hold in the treatment of prisoners in Afghanistan and Iraq because of this obscuring of the standards.
We actually murdered people. We murdered a couple of people in Afghanistan, in Bagram, Afghanistan, as early as December 2002, I think it was. And as I understand now, the murder total, clearly murder total, is up to as many as 40 out of about 190 or 195 or something like that who have died in detention.
In the final days of his presidency, George W. Bush granted an interview to Britt Hume of Fox News Sunday, where he defended the interrogation practices of U.S. intelligence agencies.
The techniques were necessary and are necessary to be used on a rare occasion to get information necessary to protect the American people. One such person who gave us information was Khalek Sheikh Mohammed. He was the mastermind of the September the 11th, 2001 attacks that killed nearly 3,000 people on our soil.
There are great claims made by the President Bush on down that attacks were averted by the use of torture. And the fact is that the American people, if you tell them in polls that torture might avert an attack, will tend to support it under those conditions.
There's a nuclear warhead missing.
Torture is a common event in the fictional world of Fox TV's 24. The long-running drama stars super agent Jack Bauer, who tortures information out of suspects in order to prevent imminent terrorist attacks.
Make a sound, and I will blow your brains out all over the windshield.
Where is it?
I don't know!
Where is he now? Where's my wife?
Okay.
That torture should be a form of entertainment week in and week out on these television programs, which perpetrate the myth that torture brings about beneficial consequences. It's absolutely false, and the reverse is true.
We should be pressing this guy with everything we've got.
Let me just say very clearly that there is no Jack Bauer in the real world. The people that use torture and abuse and act like Jack Bauer in the real world consistently get negative results. They don't get valid intelligence information.
Matthew Alexander spent 14 years in the United States Air Force, including 7 years in military intelligence. In March of 2006, he arrived in Iraq to join the U.S. Army as an interrogator.
That idea that the Jack Bauers of the world are saving us by using these brutal techniques is a complete myth. People talk hypothetically about a ticking time bomb, but we live the ticking time bomb every day. We were dealing with suicide bombers. We often captured people just after suicide bombers had left their houses to conduct missions. Pragmatically, we understood that if we used torture or abuse to get information to stop and save lives, that Al-Qaeda would turn around and use that to recruit new fighters, and it'd be counterproductive in the long run. And we knew that because every day in our prison there was foreign fighters who were telling us that the number one reason they decided to come to Iraq and join the jihad and fight against us was because of torture and abuse at Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay.
For so many years we've heard about the benefits of the policies of torture and cruel treatment from the previous administration, how we needed it, how it saved American lives. I hear from the military and from intelligence personnel exactly the opposite, that it cost us intelligence, that it cost us American lives, and that it made us less safe. Human Rights First has been working for 4 or 5 years or more with a group of retired generals and admirals, military leaders who are deeply concerned about the policies of torture and cruelty against prisoners in U.S. custody.
Some retired military leaders have gone further and are calling for those who ordered torture to be held accountable. Among them is the Major General who led the Army's investigation into the Abu Ghraib prison scandal. In a June 2008 report on prisoner abuse published by Physicians for Human Rights, retired General Anthony Taguba wrote,
"There is no longer any doubt as to whether the current administration has committed war crimes. The only question is whether those who ordered the use of torture will be held to account."
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
In 2009, Barack Obama came to Washington, promising to close the prison camp at Guantanamo Bay and to shut down CIA black sites where terror suspects were interrogated. But the new president has been reluctant to pursue charges against former Bush administration officials.
Nobody's above the law. And if there are clear instances of wrongdoing, that people should be prosecuted just like any ordinary citizen. But that, generally speaking, I'm more interested in looking forward than I am in looking backwards.
The question of accountability is a complicated one, because if we have evidence of anything, it's that the decision to use torture came from the very top levels of the Bush administration, including from the president himself. So while other officials enabled this, no question about it, I'm talking about high cabinet officials, the Secretary of Defense, the Vice President, notably Dick Cheney, but also the Attorney General and officials in the Justice Department. The question is, how do you actually bring them to account?
Clearly, crimes have been committed, serious crimes, by American officials at a number of different levels. And the people who have committed those crimes must be held accountable for them.
In the United States Congress, the head of the Senate Judiciary Committee is leading one drive for accountability. Democrat Patrick Leahy of Vermont convened a hearing in March of 2009 at issue whether to form a commission of inquiry to investigate torture and other abuses committed under the Bush administration.
We saw nothing did more to damage America's place in the world than the revelation that our great nation stretched the law and the bounds of executive power to authorize torture and cruel treatment. The last administration chose this course to try to keep its policies and actions secret. I think they did that because they knew they couldn't stand the scrutiny of an open public airing.
There can be no doubt that we must fully understand the mistakes of the past in order to learn from them, address them, and of course prevent them from recurring. At the same time, there should not be a focus on retribution or payback, and such an effort should not be used for partisan purposes.
And in exchange for truthful testimony from officials, Senator Leahy would grant immunity from prosecution. This is very controversial. Do you want people who have broken the law to be essentially immune from punishment?
Senator Leahy's proposal has so far failed to catch on in Washington. The White House and Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid have said they'll block such an inquiry, and the idea has yet to attract the support of a single Republican lawmaker.
We ought to follow a regular order here. You have a Department of Justice which is fully capable of doing an investigation. They're not going to pull any punches on the prior administration.
Yes, mistakes were made. Yes, some bad things happened. But compared with a historical baseline of past wars, the conduct of the United States in the last 8 years, Senator Cornyn, has been exemplary. It's important to recognize that the Commission's most deleterious and dangerous impact would be to greatly increase the likelihood of former senior U.S. government officials being tried overseas, whether in courts of foreign nations or before international tribunals.
In March of 2009, a Spanish judge began proceedings that could culminate in a trial for 6 lawyers from the former Bush administration. Judge Baltasar Garzón once worked to extradite Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet to face trials for the murder and torture of Spanish citizens. Now he's using the claim of universal jurisdiction in an attempt to bring U.S. officials to trial in Spain.
And I'm looking very much forward, if I live long enough, to see Dick Cheney, George Bush, Donald Rumsfeld, and these other people travel. Because I would dearly love to see one of them Pinochet, as it were. That is, some country somewhere have the courage, the moral courage, to stand up and arrest them. The underpinning of our strength is our economic wherewithal. That's really being eroded right now. And our values, our beliefs, freedom, democracy, liberty, all those things that we give lip service to and that others see us violating all the time. Those are the things that really buttress our country. When we erode those pillars, all the rhetoric in the world won't save us.
In April of 2009, the Obama administration released documents detailing ways the CIA treated prisoners in the wake of September 11th. The content of the memos shocked the conscience of a nation. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was subjected to waterboarding 183 times, Abu Zubaydah 83 times. Techniques approved included physical abuse, prolonged sleep deprivation, even the use of insects in interrogations. After releasing the memos, President Obama visited CIA headquarters seeking to reassure employees of the agency.
Don't be discouraged that we have to acknowledge potentially we've made some mistakes. That's how we learn. But the fact that we are willing to acknowledge them and then move forward, that is precisely why I am proud to be President of the United States, and that's why you should be proud to be members of the CIA. All right?
Just one day after the president's visit to CIA headquarters, the Senate Armed Services Committee released an explosive new report on the treatment of detainees in U.S. custody. It reveals that former National Security Advisor Condoleezza Rice and former Attorney General John Ashcroft gave approval to the CIA to use waterboarding on suspects as early as 2002. Vice President Dick Cheney and White House counsel Alberto Gonzales later signed off on the tactics as well. Those revelations prompted Senator Dianne Feinstein of California to ask the administration to reserve judgment over whether to hold officials accountable until the Senate's Intelligence Committee finishes a review of past conduct.
For those who carried out some of these operations within the four corners of legal opinions or guidance that had been provided from the White House, I do not think it's appropriate for them to be prosecuted. With respect to those who formulated those legal decisions, I would say that that is going to be more of a decision for the Attorney General within the parameters of various laws, and I don't want to prejudge that.
Clearly, very serious crimes have been committed by U.S. officials at a number of different levels in our government. And there's no question that those individuals have got to be held accountable for their crimes. That is the essence of a rule of law society.
Constitutional experts say there are different ways an accounting could take place. Some have called for a nonpartisan commission of inquiry, similar to the 9/11 Commission, to examine the facts and investigate abuses. Such a commission could be appointed by Congress or by the President. Others are calling for Attorney General Eric Holder to appoint a special prosecutor to determine whether officials should be prosecuted for violating laws prohibiting torture. And there are campaigns calling for the legal architects of torture to be held to account. Editors of the New York Times recently argued the Senate should impeach Judge Jay Bybee of the Ninth Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals. Others have called for lawyers like John Yoo to be disbarred. It may be possible for all these actions to take place.
There are some things that are so evil that they have to be opposed, even if they cannot be prevented. And there are some things that are so evil that they should never be undertaken, even if it seemed as if they might bring about beneficial consequences. And I would put torture in that category. Torture is in a category with rape and slavery and abuses of that magnitude. It's never justified.
I am confident that when there is an accounting of this kind, weighing the costs and benefits of the prior policies, that Americans will have a moment finally of recognition where they say, oh my goodness, we have sold our souls for nothing. And when that realization dawns on the American public, I think we will be ready to move on to holding individual actors accountable for the crimes that they've committed.
This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. network dedicated to global and national news, uncompromising documentaries, and diverse cultural programs. Programs that connect you to the world.